So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our panel, AI in Accounting and Tax, Resurrection or Doom. I'm your panel moderator today. My name is Lim Shehui. I'm Senior Lecturer at NUS Business School, and I teach taxation there. Together on my panel, I have with me today, I have Ben Stein from Staples. He's the co-founder and CEO of Staples, which is API developer. I have Jim Hunter, who is the managing partner of Asia Pacific Taxation, Tax in EY. And I have Evan Law, who is the chief executive of the Singapore Accounting Commission. So let's give them a round of applause. Thank you. So just to set the context straight, we are going to talk about whether AI is disruptive for our profession, meaning accounting or taxation. And to start off, I'd like to talk a little bit about AI and what it means. The term AI was coined back in 1956 by Professor John McCarthy, and he defined it as being related to similar tasks of using computers to understand human intelligence. And since then, we've seen that there are several branches of AI: logical AI, search AI, pattern recognition, inference, and learning from experience. And there have been various applications of AI. We've seen them in games, speech recognition, computer expert systems, heuristic classifications, and most importantly, I guess the most important contribution from AI research is that of natural language, understanding natural language. And I think the best person to tell us about this today is Ben Stein. So Ben, would you like to tell us a little bit first about your organization, and I'll follow through with Jim and Evan to talk a little bit about their organizations before we launch into the panel proper.
Sure. Hi everyone, my name is Ben Stein. I'm a chartered accountant by trade and also a full stack software developer. Late last year, I teamed with two PhDs to start a company called Staple. We use proprietary machine learning and computer vision techniques to read and interpret documents and then perform data entry and bookkeeping faster, cheaper and more precisely than a human can. We do a range of different document types, obviously things like invoices, receipts, but also things that are much more complex like full contracts and things that aren't necessarily accounting, like KYC documentation. We can train our AI to also read and interpret data points for loan documents, boarding passes, medical certificates, etc., etc. You can see on screen how our technology works. We are not an OCR company. We have a proprietary AI technique that can find data points of interest on any document, and it doesn't require any rule setup. It doesn't. We can handle multiple languages, including Mandarin shortly, and it takes a more human approach to reading documentation as opposed to traditional techniques like OCR. I'll just quickly show you some of the other kinds of documents. I mean, the receipts here, you can see the highlights that our system is picking up in a range of shadows, angles, and settings, invoices, receipts, that can be then interpreted into a machine-readable format and fed into a system. So we can do this for contracts as well. We don't have time to go through a full contract on stage today. But this is our end game, basically, to allow humans to focus on more human tasks and allow our software to do more repetitive, mundane work.
Thank you, Ben. And Jim, would you like to tell us a little bit about what's happening at EY?
Yeah, I think most people know EY in terms of one of the big four firms with. We have 270,000 people. We're adding 60,000 people a year. So obviously the human element of our business is alive and well. I've been the Asia Pacific head of tax for the last 7 years, from Korea down through New Zealand. But today's my last day in that role, and on Monday I'm going into a global role, still based out of Hong Kong, in running our global compliance and reporting business, which is really, from a tax perspective, our data operate business in terms of all elements of how we interface with clients and governments on all aspects of information reporting, data, value creation, risk management, and compliance, obviously. So from that perspective, that's where we are. Obviously, as a firm, we are going through a major transformation right now when it comes to looking at ways of leveraging robotics, leveraging AI, leveraging blockchain, leveraging other emerging technologies, and really developing several layers of capability within the organization from our most advanced sort of innovations and focus on emerging technologies to our very strong focus at the staff level and recruiting from universities and other places on more ongoing data operations, visualization, and a real strong desire to embrace technology. So that's a lot what we're going through, and I know we'll touch on more, but that's at a high level.
Yeah, basically, EY is a major user and contributor in the digitization of tax administration.
Yes.
And Evan, can you tell us a little bit more about SACC?
Sure, happy to. Warrior clicker. So primarily, SACC stands for the Singapore Accountancy Commission. We are a statutory body under the Ministry of Finance. The SACC is a sector developer. We basically look after the accountancy sector and how we can develop it. We do it through three core areas. These are in skill sets, defining skill sets, and to which we set the Chartered Accountants exam in Singapore. We also set the exams for the business valuation qualification. So these are some of the, on the board, these are some of the initiatives in terms of the skill sets we are trying to promote in Singapore. We are also looking into how we can develop the industry. How we do this is through grants, technology grants, leadership grants, or training skills grants that we offer to the industry. We also hope that Singapore can be an accountancy hub. We do offer some of the leading edge or developing or high growth areas in terms of our conferences. The Business Valuation Conference that's going to happen toward the end of this year in October will be based in Singapore. We also try to attract global conferences such as the Internal Audit Global Summit that's coming in 2020 to be held here in Singapore. So these are some of the key areas they are going into. We also plan for the sector through the accountancy roadmap. There are five high growth areas. You can see on the board: business valuation, risk management, finance, internal audit, etc. So we put in incentives, we put in grants to help businesses and firms to grow in this area. The idea is to create 2,000 new jobs by 2020. So these are some of the landscape that we have, the technology spent by the big four, the large firms and the small firms. Interesting data that naturally, the bigger you are, you spend more, but I want to draw your attention to the smaller firms. The spend is not that much. The key thing in doing our interest in pushing technology is to have savings and productivity. You can see from the chart that there's significant time saving, there's revenue generation in terms of being more efficient. The last chart is basically show you the revenue. You may notice the medium, the small, and the micro firms. A lot of them, significant amount of revenue is on audit and assurance, but yet the spend on software for audit or tax is insufficient. I think so. There's a gap to be bridged.
I
so
agree.
That's about it.
Well, that's very comprehensive. Thank you very much, Evan. So let's get into the conversation proper. Now, here's the observation. There has been yet to be an agreed definition of what AI means. And AI actually means different things to different players in the accountancy and tax ecosystem. So I'm going to ask everyone here on my panel what it means to them and how it has driven transformation in their areas, okay? So let's begin with Ben.
I guess for me and my company, Staple, we think AI is the ability to mimic human behaviour in performing a lot of the data entry, bookkeeping and accountancy tasks. There are traditional technologies out there, OCR and other reading technologies that try to do these human activities but fall quite a bit short of the mark. So our mission and ethos is basically to try and perform as a human would in these recording and bookkeeping activities.
Thank you. Jim?
Yeah, some of you who know my background, I mean, I was a software developer for many years before I went into tax fully in the 90s. And so my background, I still very much embrace technologies as they come along. And the reality, what I'm seeing right now from an AI perspective, particularly in a Big Four context, is both attempts to basically leverage big bang AI in terms of things that could be highly disruptive. But I think there are some that are succeeding and there are some that are failing, quite frankly, because either AI is not ready or the application of it to a broad subset of things like going and getting all the data you need, or being able to do a lot of things that require a lot of human domain knowledge and skills is a bit more of a struggle. But what I'm seeing a real explosion of focus in AI within EY is in the focus of machine learning and some of the practical applications of AI to more mundane tasks. And so we're seeing some of our young professionals pulling down open source AI and applying it to applications, one of which saved 500,000 hours of time that was otherwise very mundane. And then daily we have people using machine learning in terms of everything from fixed asset reviews to indirect tax elements and other things of that nature. So the more that our people are learning about the practical applications, the more that machine learning and AI is maturing, the more we're kind of riding that wave at the moment.
Great. Evan?
I think for the smaller corporates as well as the smaller firms, you may think that AI is not here yet. It's too expensive. I'll feel it's a matter of time where this sort of technology will cascade downwards, and there'll be cost efficiency in terms of pricing. You will have a lot of accessibility in terms of the services that you can deliver using AI and robotics to help you remove a lot of your mundane tasks. So it's here to stay. Technology is here to stay, and what the government is trying to do is encourage firms and corporates in finance department to take up technology, and I can share a little bit more later on in terms of some of these grants and subsidies available to you.
Excellent, thank you. So now, central to the theme of using AI in accountancy and tax is the question on data strategy. And as we know, in accounting and tax, it is key to ensure that data collected or data being used has integrity, is accurate, and is available on a real-time basis. Now, on this note, I guess I'd like to have Ben respond to what you have seen in terms of how AI is helping with data integrity for your clients, any challenges, and how you have helped, Staples has helped to overcome these challenges.
Sure. I guess most of you are accountants in the room, or have at least had some exposure to accounting. We refer to the process of the record to report life cycle of data. It's important that data is high quality and clean when it enters a system so that you can get quality outputs and quality reporting. There's a lot of AI and a lot of software that focuses on analytics and reporting and forecasting, but you probably know it's pretty useless if the inputs themselves are not accurate or clean. So we focus a lot on the recording aspect, making sure that the data ingested into a system is clean to start with, and ingest it in an accurate and timely fashion. Traditionally, there's a bit of a trade-off between timeliness and accuracy. As you know, there's a month-end or period-end close process in most organisations that is needed to clean up the data for periodic reporting. But yes, sorry, go ahead.
So I'm going to ask you a real hard question now. How do you
Yep.
differentiate yourselves from your competitors? We know that there are many APIs in the market that do exactly what you do.
Yeah,
So
sure.
how do you differentiate yourself?
So we differentiate ourselves using our proprietary tech. Now, most of you might also be familiar with OCR, optical character recognition, which allows us to scan in PDFs or written documents. But that technology was developed in the 90s and was intended to read documents from top to bottom, start to finish, as you would a book. It reads the characters and then reassembles it in a fashion that it believes makes sense. We don't do that because you don't typically read things like invoices or forms or medical certificates from start to finish like you would a book. You look for data of interest or very high interest portions of a document and then interpret it in the fashion that you need for your accounting. So we've developed our technology to understand key points of interest, key data points, to scan a document and interpret a document just like a human would. It's much quicker and it's much more accurate. It can do things like line items and high-level details that OCR would miss.
You sure you don't have a back-end body shop where there are actually people keying in and transcribing data?
That would be the case. That would be the case for a lot of our competitors. You may have used OCR and noticed it takes several hours to get a result, but I'm confident to say we can return results in under 30 seconds, except for large contracts. It may take a few minutes. But that was part of the reason why we got started in this space, is because we started with a problem. We wanted to focus on the data entry problem with our customers, and we didn't start building our solution first. We focused on the problem first. And we found that the tech out there was taking 8 hours to interpret an invoice in some cases. This was surprising because it turns out a lot of the software has to develop a different rule for different formats, or it is taking a photo of a document and then sending it offshore to be keyed into a system. It's a happy accident that some of those companies are now coming to us because we can do it faster than their offshore teams.
Glad to hear that. So now, Jim, can you tell us how EY has responded as a business accelerator using AI?
Yeah, so obviously trust is paramount for us as an organization, and also quality. We always had the tagline of quality in everything we do, and the reality is that we are seeing an uptick in overall quality as we're leveraging robotics, as we're leveraging technology, and now we're doing things on a much broader basis around everything from a cloud-based data platform where we can work collaboratively with our clients, and also respond to the disruption that's coming from government as well, in that there are many different speeds of governments around the world that are absolutely requesting data, expecting that our clients and that we just have it at our fingertips. And so being able to have the platforms and positions in place so that we can help our clients and be an interface with governments is exceptionally important.
Which explains why Forrester Research has voted EY in 2019 as a leading global digital business transformation accelerator. And this has been further endorsed by HFS Research that you are also leading in the RPA field. So
Yeah,
how,
in
would
fact,
you like to demonstrate that?
I've got my new job coming on Monday, and I'm inheriting a couple thousand robots in that process. So how I evaluate them, I haven't quite figured out yet, but I'll work through that. But to your point, we are doing an awful lot of things around helping our clients and governments to innovate when it comes to these emerging technologies. And a picture is worth 1,000 words. So maybe I have a short video where it shows a little bit of what we're doing in the Wavespace area in our tax foundry, and just to give you a quick glimpse into what we're doing. So some of you would have noticed there were actually, some of those were videos from our symposium, which is right upstairs, where we have a pop-up Wavespace. But our Wavespace network is now 20 strong across the globe, where we work with clients globally around trying to, and virtually, in order to basically to deal with tough business issues and apply AI and other technologies to their business issues. And our Foundry, we've got one of our Foundry leaders here at Belinda, who's running a Foundry both in Singapore and in Sydney. But our lead Foundry is work in collaboration with MIT out of Cambridge. And so, there we're absolutely working on some of the most advanced technologies and looking at how we can disrupt ourselves as we're also being disrupted.
That's excellent. As an academic and being in the university, I'm especially interested in your collaboration with MIT. I know you said something about that before. Can you give us some examples of the solutions that have come out from the lab?
Yeah, so
Perhaps,
we've done quite a bit actually in the unstructured data areas. It was very similar to what Ben's doing with some of the document management and AI applications in that space. We've done quite a bit of practical applications in the tax and law from that perspective. We've also looked at some big projects. We've collaborated with some major AI houses around practical applications for AI and transfer pricing, for example, and whether, how would we do comparable searches for what an arm's length transaction is, and using AI to do everything from searches on the web to a lot of documents that are readily available to help us with that and save literally tens of thousands of hours. So these are some of the things that the Foundry is working on, and in doing that in collaboration with MIT has been fantastic, as well as other academic places.
I just want to jump in here. I just want to have a comment that AI is not just accessible to the EYs, the Deloittes of the world, or the MNCs, but it's actually within reach of the smaller, mid-sized firms as well as corporations. You may have noticed on the slide earlier on that we offer subsidies. We do offer a $2.5 million grant for smaller firms on digital transformation for adopting accounting technologies. This includes in the areas of practice management, internal audit, and tax. AI is embedded in some of these technologies or some of these softwares that we have curated. For example, in practice management, it has the ability to predict what your client needs and the services that they are in need of. It also predicts and helps you plan what are some of the key areas in terms of your audit scope or areas that your clients will want to go into, and help you make better business decisions and business development with your clients.
Thank you. So having heard all points of view, I'd like to know, are there any learning points in your AI journey so far? What has been the greatest issue in adoption of AI? Is it trust? Is it human factor? Where human factor is concerned? Relationships?
Yeah,
Data?
obviously, we're in the accounting and tax profession. We're very focused on controls and processes, and often there's a bit of a joke of, why did the accountant cross the road? Because they did it the year before, right? And that ultimately we're a little bit resistant to change at times. And the reality is that the biggest practical thing for us is just the acceptance and wanting to embrace those types of technologies. The exciting thing for me, though, is the fact that our young population, as we add capability every year, is really wanting to embrace this change and really wanting to take advantage of whether it's open source types of technologies or just really embracing robotics or machine learning or other practical applications, and recognizing that these are now increasingly tools of the trade. In fact, we often joke about robotics, for example, being the macro of the current time versus where we were with Excel 20 years ago, right? And so from that perspective, and there could be real garbage in, garbage out scenarios with that. So we need to make sure that we are increasingly hiring people that are capable of helping us to ingest more efficiently and to cleanse data more efficiently so that the controls that we put in place are more than adequate.
That's excellent. Ben?
I'd agree with that, yeah. I mean, finance teams, in my experience, are very, very slow to change, very resistant to change. I think the only department that's worse than that is HR, typically. No offense to anyone, but I guess the other issue I've seen is processes or workflows that are either entirely human, traditionally, or partially human. It's very difficult to sub out a human and replace it with AI. An entire workflow. There's inevitably some human participation in a financial workflow. Even with what we're doing, if an invoice is issued in error by a human, it's very difficult to entirely trust the AI output. So unless you can entirely remove human participation from a workflow, it's very difficult to successfully integrate that.
Just want to jump in a little bit in terms of drivers of change. One big driver of change is the environment. For those firms that are doing audit, you know that the prices of audit fees are going down. And in order to earn that same amount of revenue and have that same amount of margin, you need to do even more audits, and that would have an impact on quality. But to not leverage on technology in such a way, because you can do much more and be more efficient and have better margins if you employ technology into some of the services that you offer.
So it looks like technology is here to stay, and
and look, I'm a tax person, but I know that we're spending a ton of money on the audit side, and with audit rotations and other things in a lot of locations, it does have an impact on pricing, even though the risks are higher with cyber and other things where there are things that we need to basically be more on the front foot around. So it is an interesting dynamic. Risks in a digital economy are higher, but rotations and other things mean that there is pressure. So we've spent a lot of money on what we call EY Canvas, which is a global platform, cloud-based platform around audits. And increasingly with things like, we call it Helix, which is more of an advisory focus around what is the value, what are the risks, and what are the analytics that could be applied against all the data that we're ingesting with clients around their financial audits and accounting facts and circumstances. So, the value side of managing risk and helping with business issues is quickly adding to where we used to be with just a flat-out financial audit.
So I guess data risk is a key factor in our field. And where data risk is concerned, we're talking about integrity again. You mentioned, Ben, just now that you seem to be putting a bit of blame on the entry points. But what happens if we bring blockchain into the picture? Because blockchain captures and ensures the integrity of data at source. What does blockchain bode for APIs such as yourself? Is it threat? Is it complementary? What can you tell us about?
Yeah, sure. Out of interest, how many people here have actually interacted with a blockchain of any kind? Purchased crypto?
Raise your hands.
Enterprise blockchain?
Yeah.
Okay. This is part of the problem, is that for a successful blockchain implementation to work, you need consensus. You need all participants in an ecosystem to be on the blockchain to start with, and we are not there yet. Maersk had a project last year. They, I guess, quite impressively tried to onboard the entire logistics and shipping industry onto a blockchain administered by them. The only problem is that if you're one of Maersk's competitors, what's in it for you? You're giving the biggest player in the industry more power. So I guess a big barrier to that is consensus, participation, and also you want the administrator of the blockchain to be neutral. So ideally a government or maybe a consortium of companies. We're still a long way away from that right now.
Yeah, and I'll pile on here. I think we're looking at several practical applications of blockchain because the huge benefit of blockchain is the trust element of a trusted ledger environment like that, which is huge for us in the tax space. And we know that governments are looking at this pretty actively as well. So in some situations, we're collaborating directly with those governments around those types of projects. But it's the adoption side of things, and the collaboration ecosystem is the perfect way to say it. One example of that is we and others are collaborating with the OECD around a blockchain solution for withholding tax leakage, which is a multi-billion-dollar issue for industry. But how do you get all the governments to buy into that platform, and how do you get the companies to also buy into that platform and leverage that platform? And we know it can't be the EY blockchain OECD withholding tax solution, because then it won't get adopted, right? So it has to be an industry standard for broad adoption.
Great.
And so those are things that we're, the kinds of collaborations that are happening right now, but adoption is key.
So just to answer your question, sorry, for these reasons, I think because it's so far away, very few companies, very few businesses are willing to put in the work right now for a carrot that's 5 to 10 years away. AI solutions are there now, and they work readily regardless of participation from other players in the ecosystem.
Yeah, so we see that. Oh, sorry. Do you want to?
So I
say
just want to
something?
jump in. In the Singapore context, the SAC is working with EDB and the different regulators in trying to create a sandbox to implement blockchain or test out robotics or AI technology in a safe environment. So we are trying to lead the way. It's not easy because many regulators are resistant to some of these changes because they're not familiar, or the element of trust is not there. So it's about that journey towards creating that trust.
And to that, I would say that it is identifiable that the hindrances to blockchain usage of blockchain are predominantly, because you need buy-in. Until the time we get harmonization of rules on the use of data, I don't think we'll see that being adopted so fast. And the stopgap solution is to still rely on documentation. And I guess for you, Ben, that's good news, isn't it?
That's right. I mean, maybe one day we may do away with documentation in the supply chain, in our day-to-day accounting and bookkeeping.
Yeah.
If accounting systems on both sides of a transaction can plug into a universal blockchain that's such that records are the same on both sides of the ledger, great. But for now, humans can only read human language. They can't read machine language.
But let's be clear that blockchain is being leveraged, right? We even though the practical application in the accounting and tax ecosystem is still a little ways off in terms of getting that level of adoption, we're seeing it being, I've just heard about one a week or so ago where we're using blockchain in the wine industry in order to make sure that when somebody wants to confirm that they have an absolutely valid bottle of wine that hasn't been counterfeited, that they can use the blockchain in a trusted environment to be sure that that's a valid, a authentic bottle of wine, from the source. So it's things like that can still be done, but it's much more narrow usage than what we're talking about.
Yeah, and I guess with regard to blockchain, the point is that it is being adopted on a very unilateral basis. There hasn't been very much multilateral collaboration on it. And I'd like to bring the question back to data again, okay? Let's come back to this point about data integrity. Now, so we capture good data integrity with blockchain. Until then, we still have to use documentation. But documentation comes in various forms, right? There's structured data and there's unstructured data. We see in the legal field, with legal tech, you can use AI in contract reading, in grabbing important information to put predictive decision making in place. But what about unstructured data? How does work in our field?
So-
What are examples of unstructured
Yeah,
data for
okay.
accounting, right?
I
And which
mean,
fields?
So structured data is typically the data that can be read by a computer database. Or
Yeah, the
relational
columns and
database.
rows, right?
Yeah, exactly. So for simplicity, unstructured data is basically everything else. So it could be a document, it could be an image, it could be video or sound.
Or
but
scribbling on a contract?
yeah, exactly. So that's where we come into play. We deal with unstructured and semi-structured data. So something like an invoice might be semi-structured, where it's partially machine-readable text, but partially tables and line items. So our company and other players in the space do that conversion from unstructured and semi-structured to structured, which is machine-readable.
So I'm going to take this a step further and talk about subjectivity. Right now, as I said before, AI can be easily adopted in very rigid, predictable contexts. But what happens where there is a need for judgment, human judgment and subjectivity, say in the use and in the interpretation of accounting standards such as revenue recognition? How do you see AI helping, or will it help at all, or do we still need the human factor in this?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I mean, clearly, I continue to say wherever I go that it's a really exciting time for the profession, because people can collaborate around these technologies and AI and really add value. And as I've said before, our young people want to add value. They want to do good as well as well in their careers. And so from that perspective, the ability to apply that to to practically is something that we're seeing. But I mean, clearly, when it comes to AI, we're seeing very unique applications of that. I think I mentioned to you earlier that, for example, in the accounting area, we're using drone technology with AI in order to do inventory analysis, as an example, where you go, instead of having to have somebody go through and one box at a time check the inventory, you fly a drone in that takes a picture and it uses AI in order to analyze what's in the picture and do the right level of inventory analysis, but it still requires the human to interpret that, what has been analyzed by the technology. But at least now we have removed the robot from the person, by allowing them to deal with the human elements where that interpretation is key and not focus on the mundane.
Exactly. I just want to jump in right here, and there has been a lot of doom and gloom about the future accountancy profession. Some say the whole profession is going to be overtaken by robots and AI. Numerous parents has asked me, did I send my son or daughter to NUS to study account? Is that the right move? I don't think.
It's a question I have to answer every.
Yeah, it's
hope
not
so.
doom and
Thank
gloom.
you.
We feel that AI technology and robotics is meant to augment the accountant, the future accountant. It's not meant to replace it. There are certain mundane, routine tasks that will be useful to be taken by robotics. AI is used to enhance the human judgment in terms of flagging out and doing 24/7 audits or analysis. But it's not going to replace that human judgment. And the question that I often ask accountants is the FRS going to be more complicated or going to be less simplified? The answer is it's going to be more complicated. There's going to be more FRS going to be rolled out. So that requires the human judgment, that requires human interpretation. Then my next question is crime going to go away? Yeah. Right? Where there's crime, there's always the need for accountants.
Well, and we're finding that as data becomes more readily available and is greater, cleansing through machine learning or AI or other things, the governments are just expecting that taxpayers or companies have that information at their fingertips, and so that's not necessarily always going to be the case, right? So from that perspective, a lot of the time and effort is in trying to sometimes catch up to where governments are in terms of their expectations, as well as where they're going with their own processes and controls. And so I would say 90% of companies right now think they're behind where those expectations are, and so there's, using AI, using other technologies to try to catch up to that, I think is very important.
Ben, I think you want to say something about
Yeah, I mean,
how the context in which there won't be so much.
Yeah, you mentioned revenue recognition.
Yes.
So, I mean, that's relevant for FRS reasons. It is easy to use AI to generate contracts and understand the obligations of those contracts between two parties. The challenge is then the interpretation of delivery of the contractual terms. I mean, there's a company, Clause.io, which is in the US. They have a technique to take a human handwritten or a human contract, which we use today for legal reasons, and then bind it to a smart contract on the blockchain. Then they can listen for future achievement or future enforcement of the contractual terms. It's fairly straightforward for a service contract or a logistics company delivering milk at 4 degrees, for example. That's something that they've been doing, and if they satisfy that obligation for X number of units, then the contract is fulfilled and they can recognise the revenue. However, it becomes more challenging for more complex industries like construction, engineering, web design. How do you know when you're happy with the delivery of the item in a contract? That is still a distinctly human undertaking.
And it's linked to revenue recognition.
Exactly.
Issue on revenue. Thank you very much. So now let's go on. We said a lot just now about, parents asking whether you're accounting. So from all this, we see that there's still a need to interpret the data that's right in front of us. So it seems to me that I'm glad to hear that accounting education is here to stay. In fact, it's essential. I mean, if you don't have that basic understanding on the principles of what behind taxation and accounting, how are you going to get the AI engine to work? So would you like to tell me what is the, Evan, I think this is a question everybody would like to know, right? At least for me. Do you see the curriculum changing for the accounting qualification? Are we steering towards a more asking questions, scoping kind of a skill set requirement?
Definitely. We work quite closely with the different universities. For the Chartered Accountants exam, we are already moved to a bring your own device, bring your own laptop environment where we take exams using your own laptop. They download the encrypted software and at a certain point in time with certain passwords, it's unlocked. The exam is unlocked and the rest of the Wi-Fi is locked down, etc. But one of the key reasons why we moved to that platform is to start infusing technology testing into those elements and to empower it, where we will start bringing in data analytics, usage of AI, the ability for you to download financial statements on a digital form and be able to crunch data and make sense of it.
So we see that there will be a shift in the way students are going to be examined. It's like being able to scope out questions. What do you think as an employer?
Yeah.
Do you think that's what you're looking for in a future accountant?
And look, I look at hundreds of resumes every year, and what we're really looking for are those students who continue to focus on their deep technical learning, because the reality is that value in what they have in their deep technical learning
That's
around
good news for me.
tax and and those areas is exceptionally important, and only getting more difficult because all the tax reforms that are happening around the world. I mean, the U.S. is the biggest example of that recently, but there's a cascade. We've got BEPS and digital taxation, and and those types of things that are on the horizon are actually happening in a lot of places. There's mandatory disclosure requirements. There's other types of things that are all happening right now, which require heavy human interpretation, heavy technical capability, but we expect that to be increasingly married up with a real base of knowledge and intellectual curiosity around technology. and understanding the practical application, because like in the UK, for example, it was several years ago, they put in a requirement that CEOs of companies have to sign off on the tax controls that are in place, and that's something that all of our people need to be able to be engaged in helping companies, you know, to make sure that their controls are in place so that the trust level with governments only goes up.
So I just want to augment that comment with sharing that our Chartered Accountants qualification has a 3-year work requirement. Infused in that 3-year practical work experience, the candidate must demonstrate leadership skills, collaborative skills, being able to have a relationship type of engagement with the clients. These are all important elements because technical is a given, but the ability to engage your clients, the ability to engage your customers is critical in developing the business leader.
Yeah, I want to just echo, I want to pile on to that a little bit, because the reality is that I think it's threefold things that are transforming. There's that deep technical learning, there's the digital elements, which I already mentioned, but your point is incredibly valuable, because as those things come together, we're dealing more with business issues of our client as opposed to, you know, traditional model for the accounting and tax profession, which was much more, you know, I'm an expert in something, let me help you with that. You know, now it's much more a collaboration of multiple experts to help with a business issue. So being able to have those relationships, being able to understand the business and the sectors that they're working in is incredibly important, because that will inform exactly what you need to flex in terms of your technical knowledge as well as your digital knowledge.
So thank you very much for the perspective of what you expect the future workforce to look like. But let's talk about the pressing issues right now, systems, legacy issues. Is there any pushback you see in your experience on the adoption of robotics and AI in your environments? And what have you done, or what are you doing to help facilitate and help the existing group of people, professionals, transit into this new era?
Yeah, so, you know, I would say that human nature is human nature and that there is a resistance, but I've actually finding that the resistance to adopting technology, particularly because of the young folks that we've got coming up through the organization that increasingly are growing up with this technology, is a lot less than other things that we've tried to do around centralization, for example, working in virtual teams where we'd have shared service centers in Manila or India or other places. Adopting that is actually, I'm finding, harder than adopting technology.
Indeed,
because people are very comfortable either having the person sitting next to them to do the work because they can control that, or the technology that they can control is right there as well, versus a virtual team where I'm having to work on a 24-hour time clock, or, you know, and where I can't reach out and grab a throat, you know, where I need to in terms of managing the day-to-day. So I think we're getting there on both fronts, but it is, you know, it is interesting that I think the adoption will be faster on the technology front.
And we mustn't forget those who are the guardians of their area, field, and the data they control, and whether there's any, you know, what does it take for them to give up that right to control and manage that data?
It is a control thing, but you better embrace the technology, you know, or it's going to be that all of the control could be out the window. So.
In my experience, we were concerned when we started out that there would be resistance to what we were doing from finance teams in businesses. You know, obviously a lot of the work we're doing is the recording and the data entry and bookkeeping, and we were very worried that the people doing those jobs at the moment would really block us from getting into those businesses. But surprisingly, they embraced it. They were really excited about having technology do a lot of the mundane, repetitive work, so that they could focus on the value-adding work that their bosses actually saw.
So it looks like we are moving up the value chain. And Jim?
So you can ask the turkeys to vote for Christmas.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Now, on to the last 3 points. Let's talk about reimagining the accounting profession, all right? So let's go in turn. So how do you think the role of accounting and tax providers will be changed? And how do you think it's going to be reimagined? What does moving up the value chain really mean?
Well, I mean, we like to think of it as a cybernetic approach or a cyborg approach where robots will do the lower level record and bookkeeping activities, whereas the humans will do the subjective interpretation, reporting, consulting, advisory, and course correction if a business is not performing well.
Oh, that's good. Yep.
Yeah, and I think re-emphasize technical and value-added skills, embrace the technology is going to be critical. And again, that business knowledge, really being able to marry that up with a deep understanding. But our tax directors around the world are trying to figure out how they can push themselves up into the C-suite a lot more to have a much stronger understanding of what's going on in the business and be on the front foot when it comes to dealing with these issues. And that's a very value-added environment, you know, as opposed to the traditional model where, you know, particularly tax, you'll figure it out after the fact, right? As opposed to be on the front foot from a business decision perspective. So I think that's the future, right? Is really being able to provide that business decision support.
So a very prospective, forward-looking
understand
attitude towards your clients.
And understanding where both the profession is going as well as where governments are going and the new issues on the horizon, like I said, the digital tax and cross-border issues and
which is
things of that nature.
All making up the tax controversy that we are seeing these days. And Evan, please, last 5 minutes.
So one of the key things that the SAC is trying to promote to the small and medium-sized practices is start introducing and considering other lines of businesses. You don't have to solely focus on tax or solely focus on audit. There are opportunities in business advisory.
To morph, into what?
Well, in the ability to provide consultancy services, the ability to be a business partner and provide advisory services to the corporates. For your information, at the IMDA booth, we are collaborating with IMDA on this prototyping called SME Business 360. Essentially, it's about how the government can work with SMEs in funneling, generalizing and averaging data, and the ability for the SME owners to compare, if I'm a restaurant owner, these are my financials, how am I doing in relation to my competition in general?
Yes.
And then there will be the idea of being able to apply for loans, and if your business, you think you want to improve your business, opportunities for the SMPs, the practices to come and advise me on how I can improve my restaurant business.
Excellent. Now, let's come to the last part, which I have not heard yet. You have not said anything about soft skills.
I did.
I didn't really hear much. But what do you think? Do you think soft skills will take front and center in the wake of technology leveling the playing field for everyone?
Yeah, I think so. And that goes to the business consulting side of things. It goes to the
translation.
Well, and also, so it's relationships, but it's also operating more globally. Right, because we're particularly in tax, we have a tendency to be very focused on local in terms of the local needs, the local laws, the local legislation, which is all very important. But increasingly the issues that are popping up are cross-border, they're global, our business is globalizing, regardless of all the nationalistic tendencies of like my president and others, that are maybe slowing down global trade. The reality is that globalization is an unrelenting force, and so our people needing to embrace not only technology but where things are going globally and have that global mindset, I think is going to be also a soft skill that. So we look a lot at mobility and using, allowing people to experience working in other locations so that they have that global mindset.
So on that point, I mean, this globalization, this global mobility point, Singapore is a node for, key node, right, for talent mobility. So can you tell us, Evan, what does transforming Singapore into an accountancy hub, international accountancy hub, mean?
Well, it means that our accountants should be able to travel to the region to find work and to deliver services. Singapore is renowned for trust. And in my previous organization I worked for, when I want to hire an accountant, even in Myanmar, for example, the board of directors will insist on hiring a Singaporean to lead the department. But to your point earlier on soft skills, it's not just soft skills, it's about leadership. Sometime this year, toward the end of this year, we are actually launching a leadership program for small firm, to develop small firm leaders, because that's important.
Yeah.
The amount of the sort of strategic thinking is needed to drive the necessary changes, because these are the guardians, the future guardians of the various layers, and they have to be able to think strategically in terms of what are the firm's IT needs, the expansion needs, and the talent needs. So all this we put into a neat package into a leadership program.
That's excellent. And would you want to say anything about how you are going to contribute to that?
No, we definitely are. I mean, we're very involved with local universities and with the government around the tax programs and where
You're
those
going to be
are
organizing a hackathon at NUS together with Wavespace Foundry.
Yes, and so that's exciting as well,
Yes.
and we need that here in Asia, much like we're doing in the US and other places. And quite frankly, what I'm seeing is a lot of the real innovation is happening more in the emerging markets than it's even happening in some of the biggest
True.
developed markets.
That's
So
very true.
our ability to collaborate around that across ASEAN is exceptionally important, and Singapore is absolutely the hub for that.
Well, thank you, Jim. So to round up, I'll have just one final question. How do you think, after this long conversation, do you think AI and robotics can truly replace the human in our profession?
I don't think so.
Let's go down the line.
I think it's a cybernetic approach, cyborg approach. It's always going to be a part human, part AI. Cybernetic.
Cybernetic
So
accountant.
I'll be back. We need a picture of Arnold up there, not me, that's for sure.
And I guess the tagline will be, "I'll be back" for accountants.
And honestly, all you have to do is look at our numbers and the fact that we're hiring aggressively, we're adding capability, but it is much more about virtual teams, digital, and value added, and those types of things. So I think the profession is exceptionally bright right now for our people, and as long as they embrace the changes and the opportunities that are there, their careers are going to be fantastic, but they need to be able to embrace those things. And there will be some people who won't embrace that, and that those are things that will be a little bit more challenging.
I think technology is meant to augment the human element here. Accountants will continue to play a role. In fact, the accountancy sector is a huge employer. Just on the corporate side, it employs about 70,000 accountants. On the vertical, which are the firms, it employs about 18,000 talents, just working at 687 firms in Singapore. So significant.
That's a lot of firms.
Yeah.
So just to round up, it seems to me that AI is here to stay. There's no doubt about it. We have to embrace it, but accountants and tax people will evolve together with AI, and it is still required. Required that deep tactical skill sets are a must in order to so-called facilitate the use of AI. So on that note, thank you very much, panel, for your insightful sharing.